Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel, and in you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. On you was I cast from my birth. From my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Many bulls encompass me. Strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me, like a ravening and roaring lion. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death, for dogs encompass me. A company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. There is no known event from David's life to which the circumstances described by him in this psalm correspond. What is being described is an execution and a situation that David himself never faced. Harassed? Sure. Wanted dead or alive, but preferably dead on multiple occasions in his life? Certainly. But David never stood before an executioner crying out to God for deliverance. So why did he write this psalm? Well, I think we've all experienced overwhelming moments in life where we would have described catastrophically what we were going through if we'd been poetically gifted. Moments when we would have asked out loud, why? Moments when we felt forsaken by friends, maybe family, and even God. So David here isn't giving an historical account of an actual event from his life. He's giving poetic voice to how he felt, how many of us have felt at times in moments of a trial. And yet, because God is the ultimate author of Scripture, he allowed David in Psalm 22 to give voice to an event he knew nothing of and wouldn't have been able to comprehend even if he had knowledge of it. He allowed David to give voice to the cry of God the Son to God the Father in a moment of personal agony, the most ultimate moment of personal agony in recorded history. He allowed David to pen the words that foreshadowed the experience of Jesus from the cross. So Psalm 22 is a typological summary of the passion of Jesus. By that, I mean that God allowed David to speak poetically of immense suffering in ways that became literally true for Jesus 1,000 years later as he hung dying on the cross. And because he did, we have insight into the enormity of the truth that we are forgiven because he was forsaken. In Psalm 22, we learned that we are forgiven because Jesus was forsaken spiritually. It is impossible to express the depths of the horror being felt by Christ when he confesses his abandonment by the Father. The Scriptures tell us that Christ was the image of the invisible God and the exact imprint of his nature. The Scriptures teach that Jesus was in fact God. So this was something much more than a child being given up by a parent in a moment of travail. When Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" he was giving voice to the disorienting torment that was taking place at the core of his very being. Because of the nature of God being triune, what Jesus was experiencing wasn't the split of a personality. The nature of God being one means that God is always indivisible. There are no parts of God. There is only God. All of God is all of God. So Christ's unique personality and identity remained fully intact, but it was a psychic amputation within his nature that I'm not sure is possible to even illustrate without skirting on the outskirts of orthodoxy and tripping into heresy, but I'll do the best I can, and even this is inadequate. Imagine if somehow you could maintain your sense of self while experiencing the complete loss of an internal dialogue, your ability to commune with yourself, to comfort yourself. This might give us a hint of what Jesus was experiencing here. That in Jesus, who had only always known in himself the all of God, was suddenly alone. The fellowship that he'd always known had grown dark. I don't know how all this works. I don't understand how there can be this kind of schism in the Godhead without losing all understanding of who God is in the first place. All we know is that as the Father placed on Jesus the iniquity of us all, Jesus experienced something of a spiritual separation from the Father that he had never known. As he became sin who knew no sin, Jesus was, for the first time in all of eternity, alone. That was the price of our forgiveness. We are forgiven because Jesus was forsaken spiritually as well as relationally. We are forgiven because Jesus was forsaken relationally. The psalm alludes to not only the abandonment by the Father, but also by his fellow man. As he hung on the cross, Jesus was scorned by the men he came to save, despised by those he loved, mocked by those for whom his blood was being poured out. Perhaps the most pointed aspect of this relational abandonment was the mocking cry of those who chided him for his seemingly misplaced trust in God. He trusts in the Lord, verse 8. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. I mean, think about the wound that would place on the heart of Jesus. The very people to whom he had come to reconcile to God were mocking his trust in God. Imagine hanging naked and in agony before the people for whom your very blood was being poured out, only to hear them mock the God whose will you were carrying out. It would be impossible to not doubt the very God whose will you served. And we see something of that in verse 9. Yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust at my mother's breast. On you I was cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Can you hear it? He's saying, God, I've always trusted you, and yet the outcome of serving your will in my life is the rejection of those you sent me to save. The rejection of the people has produced the very epitome of an existential crisis for him. These words that we just read in the Psalms see Jesus questioning his purpose. So not only was Christ forsaken spiritually, he was forsaken relationally so violently by those he loved, that it drove the stabbing pain of the sudden silence of his relationship with God even deeper. Our very forgiveness was won at such a cost. And of course, we are forgiven because Jesus was forsaken physically. He compares his tormentors to being surrounded by bulls and the snapping jaws of lions. To be crucified would have certainly felt as if one was being attacked by beasts. The Romans had perfected crucifixion's horrors to a precision at the time of Christ that was unimaginable. A preliminary flogging that reduced the back and buttocks to a quivering pulp, and the fastening of the victim to the cross were accompanied by the taunts of both the executioner and those gathering to watch for some strange reason this awful spectacle. The physiological effects of such brutality are seen 1,000 years before they happened. In verse 14, I'm being poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. And crucifixion induced death in ways these verses described. Death was caused by a mixture of shock to suffocation to congestive heart failure to dehydration. The piercing and breaking of the human body by inhuman means was for our benefit. The Scriptures teach us that Christ's sacrifice put to an end the ritual sacrifices. Hebrews 10 records these words, "But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time until his enemies should be made a footstool for his feet. For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sacrificed." So it was because of Christ's sacrifice that the need for any other sacrifices to maintain a relationship with God were put to an end. We are forgiven then because Jesus was forsaken, handed over physically. And we must not forget that he was also forsaken disgracefully. The people surrounding and mocking him were like scavenger dogs picking at the last scraps of his humanity. Christ was stripped naked, the very last indignity that could be visited on him, and to heighten the shame, they gambled for the right to take his clothes. And it's at this point we must gather ourselves and remember what Pastor Micah reminded us of just a few moments ago, that this forsaken one wasn't a victim. He wasn't at the mercy of a world gone mad. He was in full control. He chose this. In fact, Christ on the cross is at the height of his power. So there's no poor Jesus here. He chose this and was forsaken for our forgiveness. Finally, we are forgiven because Jesus was forsaken faithfully. Faithfully. Read with me the final words of the passage I read, beginning in verse 19. "But you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen." You've rescued me. Still hanging there. You've rescued me. After the horrors of what has been described, it is a bit shocking to read these last words. In what way, in what possible way could Christ echo the psalmist's hopeful words of verse 21? Hebrew, in which this psalm was written, is a sparse and primitive language, making it difficult to track. Greek is very descriptive and picturesque and beautiful, and Hebrew is Spartan and more primitive. But it is this characteristic of the Hebrew language that gives the last part of verse 21 its power. Because It doesn't flow like it does for us in English. It isn't even translated quite like it is for us in English. Because the very last word, I mean, like a lightning bolt from heaven, claps a thunderous truth that just simply says, "You have heard. You have heard." After all the agony and torment that the forsaken one has endured, like a thunderclap, he is struck with the confidence that has betrayed him to this point. He has been heard. I think of this as Christ's final testimony from the cross. It is finished. He had faithfully completed the work assigned to him by the Father. His forsaken experience had gained for us forgiveness. I wrote this message 2 months ago while I was in Pune, India, on a day after we toured a market. And while we were there, we watched a merchant carefully wipe out a little pedestal cup and place a coconut on it. And beside it, he lit a candle. And then he began to ring a bell for about a minute. It was as strange to witness as you can imagine. Pastor Timothy, our host, later told us the coconut was his god. It was his idol. And the bell was an act of worship, presumably in the hopes that the coconut god would respond and enable that day to be profitable. The entire nation of India is enslaved by this kind of idolatry. But the entire world is as well. It's just more obvious in cultures where coconuts are worshiped. The world around us here in Johnson County reenacts similar scenes. We superstitiously pray in hopes that the right words will unlock God's blessings or keep bad things from happening to us. We ritually worship, engaging in acts of piety and ritual in the hopes that the odds of life will be stacked in our favor. Frequently, these prayers and acts of piety and ritual are done in the name of Jesus in the hopes that we might do enough to gain His favor. I have done all of this for you, God. Now, maybe, I'm worthy of your forgiveness. But it isn't what we do that accomplishes our forgiveness. It is what He has done, and He was forsaken. And because He was forsaken, we are forgiven.